Away we go. Welcome, folks, to Three Guys and an iPad. I am, of course, one of the aforementioned three guys, Brian Rieger from Content Beacon and True Impact Communications. And welcome to our little corner of the mortgage and real estate industry, a place we like to think of kind of as the proverbial water cooler. And today we have, of course, our old friends after 2 weeks, Rick Grant. He is one of our three guys. He's from RGAPR. If you read trade pubs, chances are that you've read an article or a dozen or several dozen by him. And he's also, of course, the co-founder of Content Beacon. Rick, always a pleasure.
It's good to be here, Brian. Good to see you again.
Absolutely. And, of course, it wouldn't be three guys without Kevin Breeland. He is a certified mortgage banker. He is the past president of Respro, and he's currently with Lender Amplify out of Austin. Kevin, great to see you again.
Good to see you, Brian and Rick.
And, of course, we have a very special guest today. Somebody actually wanted to come into our little corner of the industry, and that is celebrity global attorney and New Orleans native son. His name is Mark Sterbko, and chances are if you've been to an industry conference, you've heard him speak once or twice as well. Marks, how are you today?
Hold on one second. Did the check clear yet for these guys? And they cashed? Bank said it was okay? All right, so they got 30 minutes. Okay. Yeah, you're okay now. Hello,
Let the record reflect that Marks insisted we pay him in beads this week. Marks, how was Mardi Gras? I'm sure you worked right through it, of course.
I did. It was fantastic. Fantastic.
Outstanding.
A lot of work that was accomplished this week.
Well, I'd love to say it's a pleasure to have you this week. So let's move on now to Content Beacon, which is our only shameless plug of the show. And of course, Marks and I go way back, so we will probably mock each other mercilessly the rest of the event here. So it is always a pleasure to have you, Marks. This is my one and only time to mention that this is produced by Content Beacon. That's Rick Grant's and my gig, one of our gigs. And that would be the industry's only B2B content marketing agencies. So if you like what you see here, if you think we might be able to do something great for you, by all means, hit us up. You can go to brian@contentbeacon.com or rick@contentbeacon, or of course, comment in the proverbial below. And of course, if you just want to join us, if you'd like to see something on Three Guys in an iPad, then by all means, reach out to us and let us know. We will be having some great guests on, including Marks. And with that, let's go ahead and get to what you came for. I believe Kevin Breeland would like to know if we're kidding him.
Well, on this week's segment, I have a few topics I wanted to bring to our audience's attention. And the first one is, of course, we always have the weekly plug about how great Austin is. So I just wanted to let you know that Austin is also rated #1 as the best job market in the entire country, not part of it, the entire country. And it's because we have great jobs and high wages. So just in case you were wondering what actually drove that matrix, that's what it is. Great jobs and high wages. Now, the next item, which I found to be somewhat disturbing, being a child that was brought up on Life cereal and Cheerios, is that we now are entering a phase where cereal will be $13 a box. I'll let that sink in for a moment. $13 for a box of cereal, because apparently the children that we have raised, or that my generation has raised, that would be, Mark's group, they don't really like the Cheerios and all of that. They want almond-based, protein-based, good for you, healthy cereal. Well, and to make that stuff is expensive. So apparently, once again, I have failed the country in raising spoiled children. We now have to have cereal that costs $13 a box. And I just wanted to personally reach out to everybody in America and apologize for that. So.
Not me, Kevin. I'm getting a shirt that says Body by Butter, so you could leave me out of that conversation.
All right. So then the next item that I really I was actually kind of surprised when I read this. Now, mind you, because we're not poking fun at the authors or the publications where these come from. We're just kind of bringing to light what these articles are and kind of make you want to take another look at it. The person who wrote this article looks like they're about 25 years old because they put their picture with it. But in the article, it said older Americans are developing a taste for pot as more states legalize the drug for recreational and medicinal use. The researchers determined that cannabis use among people 65 and older was 2.4% in 2015 and is now 4.2%. 2018, a 75% increase. The increases were more pronounced among married couples, college graduates, wealthy, and women, all over the age of 65 or older. It more than doubled with people with diabetes, mental illness, or alcohol users. So I would just like to clarify this article for you. We are talking about the generation that grew up wearing bell-bottom pants, went to Woodstock, flower power, hippies. I mean, anybody who is surprised that people 65 and older smoke pot is like living in their own world. These people have been doing it all their life. I can tell you for a fact that I know somebody who lives in one state who drives to Colorado to buy the pot and then goes back home because it's legal in Colorado. And we're talking about 4 states they drive across. So, you know, at the end of the day, while this is an interesting article written, I don't really think it's shedding the kind of light that you thought it might, because being a child of that generation, although I've never tried it, I mean, we had a president who said he never even inhaled. So the reality of this, it should be no shock that our older people, I would suspect that if you drove or flew over the Villages, Florida, you would just see one big cloud over that entire town because it's just old people smoking pot all day long. You got nothing else better to do. So I can tell you that after we have raised our children, you know, spent all of our money, now have to have 2 and 3 jobs to support our Social Security because we didn't save anything, they have to have pot at night just to get through the day. All right. So give them a break. Let them smoke their pot. I mean, after all, we did watch Cheech and Chong movies. All right. I have always wanted a 64 Chevy with the windows barely cracked and smoke coming out where you couldn't see anything but the smoke coming out. So I'm not overly impressed by this article, but I do know some people who enjoy this quite frequently, as a matter of fact. Would not be me.
If I may, Kevin, Marks, will you stick around after the recording? We're going to need a legal disclaimer or two. So once that check gets there, just let me know. And
We'll do. That's double the price more than the 30 minutes you pay for.
Okay.
Very good. Now, Kevin's going to go ahead and give us the OK Boomer punchline now. Go ahead.
So now, my final article I want to bring to light. This is really more of a public service announcement. A few weeks ago, in one of our podcasts, you know, I mentioned about how SpaceX shot a rocket up into the air and then remotely detonated it, blew it up, and said, "Now we're ready for manned space travel." That whole thing just kind of turned me off to the whole idea of manned space travel with SpaceX. Now that I know they could actually blow me up remotely. But in addition to that, it really should make every astronaut on Earth take pause that this is the travel mode of transportation they want to take, since NASA pretty much is now contracting all of this out. But unfortunately, the same company that created, or the same person that created SpaceX also created Tesla. And we had a report come out this week, if you recall, of a self-driving car that crashed into a freeway embankment where the autopilot didn't work and the car just went right into the median and killed the driver. Now, this is the same guy that owns both companies. And so I want you to think about that for a minute. If I owned a Tesla, which I don't, but if I did, I would stop using the auto drive completely at this point, because we probably have a lot of the same engineering involved here. I'm just saying. But then on top of that, the National Transportation Safety Board says it's time to stop enabling drivers in believing they have an automated vehicle to pretend like they'd have driverless cars. So if you own a Tesla, I don't know if you do, Marks. If you don't, tell your friends. They don't drive themselves. You need to be awake. You need to be paying attention where this thing is going, because how many of us have seen on TV someone asleep at the wheel while this thing's breezing down the freeway at 70 miles an hour? So just keep in mind that while you might be able to build the porch on your house, you may not actually be able to build the house. So that's just keep that in mind.
So when you see those old people driving from Colorado back to Texas, stoned out of their minds in the Tesla, they need to keep a hand on the steering wheel is what you're saying.
At least one hand on the steering wheel.
It's good advice.
Yeah.
Marks, we've got you here. Let's ask you a few questions. We'll call this segment Around the Horn with Marks, at least until I get the cease and desist from ESPN. So you ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll.
All right, sir. Well, you're out there pretty frequently speaking to the industry. You've got a lot of clients nationally and maybe even internationally, I believe. Right now, what's the biggest legislative or regulatory issue facing the industry? And I am being intentionally vague here. What's the biggest issue facing the industry that no one's talking about?
I would say probably one of the biggest. It depends on what part of the industry. I would say overall, it would be the lack of enforcement on RESPA would be a huge issue. Okay. Followed up by aggressive practices by let's say the Bureau, CFPB, into areas that really are far from their mission statement. So I think that we're seeing right now some areas of fair lending where the Bureau has taken some very, very, very unique takes of enforcement, or they're trying to take these new steps into enforcement that we haven't seen before that could have some impacts. And on the flip side, with RESPA, the pullback when Mulvaney had taken over of all RESPA cases minus servicing, it's kind of left a huge void across the United States to where you're seeing a lot more marketplace disruption by companies that are just, they're not worried about RESPA or the impact or somebody coming after them. So it's a wild, wild west mentality.
Well,
that's what we're seeing now.
It's interesting you say that. I've heard folks, it seems like there's a perception, or I guess you'd say a misperception then, that the CFPB has kind of been drawing down a little bit, drawing back a little in terms of its aggressive posture. And sounds like that's not actually the case then? That's
not the case. From my perspective, at least with the clients that I'm representing now and talking with other attorneys in the industry, there's an aggressiveness that is taking place into pushing theories that have not been established by the industry, that could create significant disruption, not just for mortgage, but for other industries, education, car sales, hospitals that you wouldn't ordinarily think, primarily revolving around fair lending. So I'm seeing them go outside of your traditional markets and maybe looking at companies that may be involved in, I don't want to use I can't say the industry, but let's say an industry that is, let's say I install stereos, not the industry, but I install stereos and I charge a monitoring fee for that stereo. And the CFPB is saying, well, because they've installed the stereo and they're charging a monthly fee, well, that's subject to TILA. that's the sort of things that you're starting to see kind of going outside the scope of really what the core mission of the Bureau, of what it was formed for. And those things kind of need to be taken, pushed back, because there's a lot of important areas of enforcement that need to be focused on to help clean up the industry and put everybody on the same footpath. But right now, it's kind of a mixed bag.
Interesting. So CFPB is still out there. They haven't gone to sleep or disappeared. On the flip side, though, is the industry getting a little more complacent, do you think? Do you think folks kind of feel like the tough years are behind us in terms of aggressive regulation and aggressive enforcement? Or
I think there is some feeling among that in some sectors. Let's say the real estate brokerage industry, there's certainly a feeling that enforcement has been lifted off their shoulder. Title insurance industry, kind of the same thing. Mortgage is a little bit different animal, because you've got the state regulators who are a little bit more aggressive in some states. Other states, they're non-existent, but the states that they are, that they do look at marketplace conduct activities, they're pretty aggressive. Then you have the OCC, the FDIC. So there's different levels behind that onion that you peel back to see where they're where the regulation's kind of coming from.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that the state level. I've heard you speak in the past as well, that sometimes we get so caught up as an industry, and I mean the greater mortgage real estate industry, not just any specific segment, but I've heard you say repeatedly that a lot of times people forget about, I won't say forget, but they put so much attention on federal enforcement that we forget about the states. And there are some states in particular where, let's just say, it's a little more aggressive. Who's leading the pack there these days? Who do folks need to, I don't want to say keep an eye out for, but who are people maybe, where is the enforcement where's it a little more aggressive right now?
I mean, obviously, you have your traditional stronghold of states, New York and Maryland, places like that. One where I have seen an uptick in activity has been the state of Alabama on the mortgage side. Alabama, Georgia is another one with as far as advertising and mortgage compliance. But Alabama with RESPA, I would say those are areas that you really need to kind of keep a focus on. And again, it's the low-hanging fruit stuff on the RESPA side and mortgage advertising and stuff that draws their attention. And that low-hanging fruit is Facebook, Twitter, primarily Facebook, where you have referral partners that will put idiotic things on Facebook that there's no way to get out of. The intention is clear based on the messaging that someone has put on Facebook.
And of course, as you know, this is a show produced by a couple of marketing, PR, and social media guys. So for all you compliance attorneys out there, Marks is not suggesting you shut down the Facebook pages, just limit the access to or screen it, or I'm sure we could do a whole show on that as well. But
a little monitoring is good. I mean, the last thing you want to see is have your loan officers smiling with a $100 gift card furnished by the title company on the Facebook page. Just not a good look. Not a good look.
Gotcha. Or better yet, let a professional do it. Just a thought. But Kevin, you want to jump in? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question in regards to that, Mark. So are you seeing more and more of these social media violations that, you're talking about it from the standpoint of low-hanging fruit, it's easier for regulators because they have it right there. So you can't walk that back. The intent is there. But that brings up an interesting point to me, that social media, because of the format, the Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of it, you have it right there. From an enforcement standpoint, how would you defend that? Or do you just try to walk in and settle the thing and move on?
You try to, first you need to address the issue quickly internally to figure out what has taken place at that branch level or with that loan officer. Proactivity there being a critical step, and the faster you do it, the less the burden later on. Mm-hmm. The second part is find some sort of redress, and then either be proactive in a redress, with the consumers that have, you've done origination, pay them $100, $200, whatever it may be to the consumer, just to say, look, I've given some restitution back for this little technical issue. Or you just, the regulator comes to you, you try to work out a deal with it. And if one can't be made, you can certainly litigate it and argue against it, but the cost for that can be extraordinary. And the last thing you want is them to open up the Pandora's box into your entire operation and look across all spectrums, because then it really gets costly.
Do you think we're going to see a lot more of these social media type cases being litigated in the future?
I think, it's such low-hanging fruit. I can't imagine that we won't. It's really, in some of these things, they may be innocuous. Some people may put them there as a joke in the little comment section, but oftentimes you see some really crazy comments being made by a real estate agent to a loan officer or to a title company saying, man, thank you for the $100 bottle of wine in the restaurant last night. Appreciate the gift certificate. I'm going to start sending you business. Well, kind of hard to pull back from that one, but
Bermuda was
sure,
great.
there's an argument. There's always an argument.
Good Lord. Well, all right, Mark, so we got time for one more for you here. And this is what our viewers really want to know. Who makes the best cocktail in New Orleans that nobody knows about?
I would say Port of Call has a drink called the Monsoon. And if you're local in New Orleans, Port of Call makes the best hamburger in the city, hands down. Like, there is not a better hamburger in the city. Been there since the 60s. That Monsoon, you hit one of those and you are feeling really good. You hit two and your knees are really starting to buckle. Fantastic drink.
Gets you started for the drive up to Colorado, right?
That's correct. In the Tesla. But,
before you close. Okay. Stop us before we continue. On that note, Mark, thanks so much. And, for the folks out there, I'm sure more than a few have some very real legal needs at some point or another. How can they reach you?
They can go to respalawyer.com. That's one of my blog, or Respa Attorneys is the website. And those are probably the two easiest ways to get in touch with me.
Outstanding. And guys, this is one of the best attorneys in the industry. If you do need some, even consulting or legal strategy, compliance, you name it. He also does a little bit of litigation, as I understand, actually a lot of litigation. So if you guys are looking for a good mortgage attorney, Mark's is your guy. So Mark's, I'm going to ask you to stick around with us for one moment while we do mortgage headlines, but I'll thank you again for joining us this week.
Just have one follow-up question there. What other attorneys do you guys have coming on? Who else have you guys lined up on this show?
Marks, we're recording on a second generation iPad, so sometimes the sound kicks out. But
I just want to make sure that we're all on the same level, because I would hate for somebody to be left out of this. It would be excruciatingly painful for somebody to be left out. Like a Brian Rieger or a Trip Riley or even a Cole Cholman, if they're left out of this, they shouldn't.
My hearing's cutting out. My producer's telling me we've got to move on here, Marks, but thanks for joining us this week. Of course, this is the time on the show when we go to Mortgage Headline Roundup. And of course, we all get quite a few trade pub emails on a daily basis. And a lot of good stuff out there, a lot of good trade pubs and trade associations really doing a nice job covering our complex industry. So we try to pick out a couple of stories every week that maybe aren't the top headline, but something that's probably got people talking, and we figure we'll have that conversation too. So Mark's is going to stick around and join our peanut gallery for that. And of course, our first story this week comes from our friends at Housing Wire, who are really knocking it out of the park these days, I've got to say. And the story is headlined that millennials don't trust lenders or the housing market. So how do we reach them? There you go. And of course, that's written by Kristen Messerly. It was on February 12th, but it's still very relevant. And just a quick summary here. There's a study recently by Eaton Financial, which said that 92% of millennials believe banks can't be trusted. Okay? Over half said they didn't have anyone to turn to for financial advice. And of course, Ms. Messerly claims that the author, that homeownership does not necessarily translate to security for these folks. You got to remember, a lot of these millennials were raised through student loan debt, a housing collapse, rising healthcare costs, income inequality. And I think they even had to live through a Crocodile Dundee sequel as well at some point or another. So she suggests that an approach to winning millennial business that would be like working with trauma patients. So you build safety, transparency, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. Interesting read. I do suggest you take a look at it. But I'm going to toss this now to the peanut gallery. We've been spending a lot of time, feels like about 2 or 3 years, talking about marketing to millennials. Are we spending too much time marketing to them at this point? Are we just kind of beating a dead horse? What's your take on all this, guys?
Well, I'll jump in first. I think this goes back to our earlier article about the pot and why their parents are smoking it all the time. You see what we did to them. But it's not, I don't believe we're spending too much time trying to market to millennials. I mean, let's face it, millennials are the driver of the economy at this point. Baby boomers of my generation, we're dying off. We're fading off into the sunset. We're retiring and complaining about no one fixing their divots on the golf course, things like that. When in fact, the millennials are now stepping into that role where they're driving the economy. They're becoming the captains of industry. They're leading the ship. They're driving the ship, so to speak. So at the end of the day, my generation made foreclosure a household name. My generation made corruption a household word. The reality of it is that, I'm not surprised that they don't trust lenders. I'm not surprised they don't trust banks. When my daughter and her husband bought their house, they didn't even ask me what I thought. They didn't even talk to me about it. I've been doing it my whole life. They never once asked for any advice. So this does not surprise me at all. Again, it's another one of those, Captain Obvious moments. But I do think that what we have to do is relationships. That generation doesn't want to build relationships like my generation did. My generation did face-to-face, shaking hands, sitting in the office, doing the loan application face-to-face, all of that. This generation wants to do it all by email and text messaging and that way. And then the generation behind them is even more detached. They want even less contact. They don't even want to leave the house. And so I think companies, for example, like Contact Beacon, this is how you get to that group. You come up with your message where they can see it, and you have to build that message where they can see it on a daily basis. They can read about it. They can see your videos. They can hear what you have to say. They can go to your iPod, your podcast, and that's how they develop a relationship with you. And all of us on this podcast today can say that we each have someone that we talk to fairly regular on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever that format is, that we may not have even met face-to-face, but we talk to them regularly. And so we all have what I would call virtual friends now. And so we have to approach marketing in a virtual view. That's my take on it.
Well, let me follow up with Mark's on this one. Mark's, you've seen, we've discussed some of the marketing you've seen out there so far, but you've seen all kinds of marketing. I think we've all, if you're involved in the industry in any way, shape, or form, you know that the millennials been the target for how long now? And are we using outdated marketing approaches, Marks? Are we trying to reach millennials in ways they couldn't care less about, or is there a deeper problem than that as well?
No, I think what Kevin said was very accurate. I mean, how many people rely on the newspaper these days to get their news? I mean, you have different trends and different technologies and that were different a year ago, much less 5 years ago versus 10 years ago versus 20. So, a lot of these younger generations, they get their news from their cell phones, and their face is on them all day long. And where they get caught in that rabbit hole of websites or whatever content that they find, oftentimes that kind of works in their psyche as far as kind of builds up their knowledge base of the industries or government of all sorts of things. So I think that there needs to be some sort of better marketing towards the internet-based end user, I guess would be the word I would use, to get them more engaged. Because if you're relying on cable TV, which who has cable TV anymore? But 5 years ago, how many people had cable TV? Everybody has internet TV. If you're relying on your advertising just on cable, or you're missing a whole segment of society now that does not have a cable box. And I think that a lot of people don't understand the really fast moving swiftness of change coming with the millennial generation or the generation below that. It's interesting to kind of watch.
Well, and those are great points, both of you guys. And Kevin, by the way, I appreciate the plug for Content Beacon. Your beads are on the mail as well now.
Thank you.
As a marketing guy myself, I agree with your points about the media, the channel, or the medium, the channel, and whatnot in the vehicles. But I would also argue too that sometimes the message is a little outdated. And I did think, although there are places where the article may go a little bit far, I think. I do like the fact that the author is kind of going at the message itself. We're kind of I still see a lot of the same old themes being used for which were they're not resonating. They're not being bought. And I think maybe a little more focus ought to go to the message as well. But great stuff to think about. I'll ask a pop question here, guys. Who buys more homes first, millennials or unicorns?
Millennials, obviously. I mean, millennials. That's going to be that's going to be a huge moving factor going in the next few generations of home buyers. I mean, but at the same time, you've had a lot of misinformation over the years where they've gone down these rabbit holes on social media and read that you only want to rent, you don't want to buy. And so when you have those sorts of news articles that come out, well, that obviously impacts their psychological thought process going in the future, not just that day of buy, whether to buy a house or not, or buy a car, or what, just different facets that people just don't understand. And I think when you have so much negative news, that helps contribute to a lot of the resistance among millennials to make decisions, and even more so with this younger generation. Younger generation, from what I'm seeing, they're scared to death to do anything wrong. It's really a different dynamic.
Kevin, you had to put him.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off what Mark said earlier. The when he was talking about cable TVs. Now, on this podcast, the three of us are in three very different markets. You're in the Ohio market, you're in the greater New Orleans market, and I'm in Austin. So we represent three markets that are operating at three different levels. But think about when you see a billboard or a flyer or something that came across your email, apartments, and how many new construction locations are being built where one of the tags that they're advertising is fiber, is high-speed fiber, high-speed internet, 5G. I mean, they are taking the one thing that the millennial generation, the Gen Zers, that's what they want. They want high-speed internet because they don't use cable anymore. They stream everything. I mean, I can tell you for a fact on my side, 5 years ago, I never watched any kind of streaming service because I just thought that was crazy. But now I have 4 different subscriptions to streaming services. So, and I still have cable. So I really am a dinosaur, I need to get rid of something.
You're just covering your bases, Kevin. That's all. I've got a satellite dish, for God's sake. So, well, all right. Well,
Frisbee.
gentlemen, sorry?
Frisbee.
There you go. So, all right, we got one more story we've got to touch on. We'd be remiss without, guys, and that is I picked one headline out from our friends over at NBA Newslink, our friend Mike Sorhan over there. It's actually originally from CNBC and came through the feed. And we're not even going to go deeply into the story. It's more about the impact. And, of course, the headline, the story is February 12th. Mini mortgage refinance boom continues as coronavirus keeps rates low. So hopefully by the time you, dear viewer, do actually see this, the coronavirus has come and gone and isn't as awful. Wow, this almost sounds like a bad sci-fi movie, doesn't it? But guys, right now, I mean, we're having a hell of a year in the mortgage industry so far, first quarter, right? And, never mind the details or whatnot, the coronavirus is a real thing. It's going, we're hearing now that it will be an epidemic. There's talk that the fatality rates are low, thankfully, but it's going to be spreading. And rather than pretend we're doctors and talk about the virus itself, let's talk about it. Is this the irresistible force that's going to derail our wonderful market? How much is it going to affect the real estate industry in the next 6 months or so?
Coronavirus isn't going to disrupt our market. It's going to continue to drive interest rates down. But let's keep in mind the one thing that we talk about in every podcast. The coronavirus is a great example of how our economy is no longer a local, regional, or national economy. It is a global economy. And it's a global economy because of advancements in transportation, shipping, things of that nature. So honestly, until the coronavirus, I didn't even know where Wuhan, China was. And the reality of it is that, this goes to show how something that's not in the United States can affect everything that we're doing today. And to what degree it happens in the United States, I don't know. I don't want to project what that looks like because I have no idea. But I think it's a great example of how all economies now are linked, and it is a true global economy.
From my perspective, I'll tell you what I kind of have a little bit similar take to Kevin's, but a little bit different take. I think that obviously we're going to see the Federal Reserve Board meets in 3 weeks. They're clearly going to have to cut the interest rates again. And it wouldn't surprise me if they cut in the next 2 sessions after that, and which will drive up another huge refi boom. It's just going to happen. The other part, kind of the interim part, will be new home sales and the purchase market. Will that slow up, or will that continue to be very robust? One thing that the coronavirus has done is it's causing a number of large companies to rethink their strategic global supply chain. And can we afford to have all of our pharmaceuticals, or 10% of our pharmaceuticals, made in Wuhan, China? Well, the answer is no. We can't afford that. It's in the interest of national security that we start bringing these manufacturing jobs in the pharmaceutical industry back to the United States or back to Canada. And I think that what we're going to see is a large sucking of jobs out of China by these global companies, because they can't afford to be caught short on a big disruption like this, to where all of a sudden all the shipping is shut down, the air transportation shut down, and if there's a big shortage of medicine, well, how are we going to supply all of our citizens with the medicine? I think that's going to generate, in my opinion, a huge demand for more jobs in the United States, and it's going to spur more housing. It may not be immediate, but it's something I think we will absolutely see by next year. Now, as far as the impact of the Wuhan virus and whether it's super dangerous or if it's contained to certain genes that certain individuals may have or not. I guess we'll find that out as it continues to move along. But I'm not overly worried about that. I think right now what you're seeing is a factor of why the market has gone south is you have a factor of the Bernie Sanders effect and the unknown of the coronavirus, and that's creating instability and uncertainty. No one likes uncertainty. We saw in the 2018 elections there was uncertainty, and with the House races, and the market plunged. As soon as it turns out to where there's some certainty again for the presidential race and for this, I think that will be another huge upturn in the market.
And Mark, so of course, this will be an ongoing story. And you mentioned another elephant in the room that we'll be discussing throughout the year, I'm sure, here at some level or another. So, but for now, that's going to be it for mortgage headlines. And as I mentioned, my second generation iPad, the battery goes quickly, so we're going to have to wrap this up. Again, our special thanks to Mark Sterbko. Mark, if you do get those beads, will you come join us again?
I'm dumping off. I think it's four truckloads today to the local bar down the street. So there's a bead depot. So we're getting rid of all that junk.
Outstanding. The incomparable Mark Sterbko. And of course, as always, my thanks to Kevin and Rick. And yep, there goes my battery power. Rick Grant, why don't you take us home?
Thanks for joining us on today's program, and thanks to Mark Sterbko for being with us. We really enjoyed having him on the show. On a somber note, since this was recorded, Marks has actually contracted COVID-19, and he is recovering now. We wish him and his family the very, very best, and hope that all of you will stay safe. Till next time.